He is my co-host. He tolerates me as best he can, and we'll add a little bit more in today's class. He tolerates me by eating snacks during class when his microphone is not on. Good afternoon, Rich. How we doing, man?
Good to see you, Ray. Good to
Yeah,
see everyone else.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right. This
Oh,
is
your
the
80
schedule for
something
the
just
semester
shipped.
that we're doing. We're
It
currently in
just
class
shipped.
3. We're talking about it's not just about storing your records, it's can you get them back. In previous classes, we started with where the rubber meets the road. In the last class, we talked about the tools you'll need and use. Again, storing your records and getting them back will be today. In 2 weeks, we'll talk about the resources you need, both human and financial, and we'll end the semester in the 5th class with a talk about the future of records management. As Rich said, if you have a question during class, please do us a favor, leave your microphones muted. Just type your question into the chat box. Depending on the complexity of your question or where we're at within this class, we may have the ability to answer that question while the class is going on, either during the class or at the end of the class. And if we can't, then by all means, we'll start the next class with any questions that we couldn't answer. Today's class 3 is not just about storing your records, it's can you get them back? Excuse me. I want to give a shout out to a website that I get graphics from. Any graphics that you see in my presentation, as well as what other people do as well, we try to use royalty-free graphics. I'm a part of ARM International and the Keystone chapter here in Pennsylvania. And in my 30 years with ARMA, I know that there have been some chapters that have accidentally used pictures that may have copyrights on them, and then they get emails saying, take the picture down or we're going to sue, or you can't use that picture. I found a site called Pixabay.com, Pixabay.com. They have pictures like this. They have actual photos. There are some you can pay a royalty for if you want to use them. Of pictures that are no cost whatsoever, royalty free. And at times you have to type in a word or a phrase to find what you're looking for. I don't remember what I typed to get this picture, but when I look at that picture and I just see a records manager who is so frustrated and he wants to scream because he can't find the records he's looking for. And I'm sitting here and I'm smiling because I've had that face before, and I hope to never have that face again. But I thought it was definitely a quick snapshot of how some of us may feel when we're trying to find those records that we need to go out there and get for a project or some other reason. Our agenda for today, we're going to start with a new segment called Q and Ray, and we'll tell you what that's all about in a second. We'll move on to where are your records stored. We'll cover the second and third steps of the records management lifecycle as they apply specifically to can you get your records back. We'll talk about one of the most valuable words in records management that you need to have control of, and that's metadata. We'll talk about the record repository types where your records could be stored, and then you can analyze, do you really want to store them there? Where's the best place to store them or not store them based off of your organization? We talked about this tool last week, but I want to go over it again. It's that valuable in your toolkit or your toolbox or your tool belt, whatever you're wearing. And that is the records index. We'll go over quickly the reasons for finding our records. We'll talk a little bit about e-discovery, and we'll finish with a records storage strategy. So let's jump right in. And again, the new segment this week is Q and Ray. I can't take responsibility for this. Well, I can for the changing of the name. I was actually getting lunch on Friday. I was coming back home and I was listening to a local sports talk station here in the Philadelphia area. And one of the hosts of the show is Hugh Douglas, former football player for the Philadelphia Eagles. And they were doing a segment where he would answer questions, and they called it Hugh and A. And I thought, well, why can't, if they can have Hugh and A, why can't we have Q and Ray? So that's what we're doing today. If there are any questions, as I said, that appear in the chat box that we couldn't answer, that we'll start the next class with, that's what we'll do. We'll put them in the Q and Ray segment, and we'll do that now. And Rich, I think we had one question that got asked at the end of last class we'd like to introduce now.
Yeah, if you can move the slide. The question from last time was, what suggestions do you have for the auditing of the records management program if your organization doesn't even have an audit department?
Valuable question. And that is something you need to have an answer to. And the answer we have right here. And I hate to say it depends. What I'd like to say is you have options. Depending on the size of your organization, if you're a very small organization, you might not even have an audit department. You might not have that function at all. I worked for probably the first, 20 plus years. I've always worked at banks, albeit 20 years at Commerce Bank when I was running their records management program as well as their purchasing department. And in banking, we have internal auditors that belong to the bank, and we also have federal auditors that would come in and audit all areas of our bank. So that wasn't something I had to worry about. We had an audit department internally and used the feds as well. But for those organizations that don't have an audit department, whether they just never had one or they're really small, so they probably can't afford one, there are options. And it all depends on the considerations you see at the bottom of the screen. First, you have the option to outsource to an independent auditing firm. And again, there are all different size firms, just like there are all different size organizations. So if you're a very small organization, you're probably not going to go with the most well-known auditing company because their fees are really going to be high based off of their name. That doesn't mean there aren't smaller auditing companies that are reliable. There's plenty of them out there, and they'd love to have your business. So if there's money in the budget, you may want to do something like an RFP, a request for proposal, the first time to go out and see. If you were to engage with an auditing company, what would they charge? Here's what I would like done in an audit. Please tell me what your fee structure would be. So you have the potential of outsourcing it to an independent audit firm. Secondly, you can engage with a CPA firm for auditing services. Now, there are things within your records management program that have nothing to do with numbers. But with that being said, there are some, and there's also the logic between how audits are done, which CPA firms are well aware of. If you can't afford either one of those, I always think it's important that there is some type of process in place, even if it's a very basic process. And with that, you could form your own internal audit committee. You would want people within your company that are not responsible for records management, so their review and commentary is independent. If you're the records manager, you don't want to be on the audit committee because you could be accused of being biased for your own program. You want independent people in your organization where you can educate them on records management and what you're trying to do. And then you decide what you're going to have this internal, ad hoc audit committee do. And they'll come back with their findings. And that's a way to at least start the auditing process. I would rather have the ability to do an audit with an internal audit committee, as informal as that may be with your own organization. So you're doing something, because there's going to be a point in time, and it may be a long time from now, but there's going to be a point in time where it's going to be questioned, how do we know the records management is being done properly in your organization? And if you can start with an internal audit committee and come back with those findings, we have reviewed that the storage for X amount of records is correct. The contents of the boxes are correct. We've looked at the access for electronic storage, and the access is correct. As long as they're doing very small checks around your whole program, you're coming back that there is some type of process to review what you're doing, and you're doing it well and you're doing it right. And then down the line, if you can eventually get your own audit company or audit department or use an outside auditing company, you can now show them what you did and ask them to take it to the next level. When it comes to auditing, there's definitely considerations whether you do it or whether an outside company does it. And you have to deal with industry regulations, because if they're auditing something, there could be something within those regulations that tell you how you have to do certain things. Even though I worked for a bank, we had our banking division, we had a separate insurance company, we had a separate investment company. So there are regulations for all of those things independently. So some of them will be similar, but there will be differences in the regulations for each one of those industries. So understand the regulations that you have to abide by within your industry. So whether you do the review or an outside company does the review, they're making sure that they're incorporating the following those regulations. What risk tolerance are you willing to accept? If you don't do any audit at all, even with a small company, if there is no audit done at all, then you are wide open for risk because you're not checking anything. Where even if you take on your own internal audit committee, you're now lowering the risk because your internal audit committee is reviewing things and hopefully lowering that risk tolerance. And as what usually hits us in records management, there's budgetary concerns too. If you're going to do an internal audit committee, then it's the time of those people that would normally be doing something else doing the audit. If you're going with an outside company, an independent firm to do your audit, there's going to be costs for what they're going to do, which is why you may want to do a request for a proposal and see what you can afford. But the graphic on the right kind of sums it up for me. The answer to the question might not be the same thing to everybody that's listening to this class today. Some people might say, I'd love to, we'll go with an independent auditing company, and other companies will say, we can't do that. We don't have the money. So, again, it's whatever works for your company. There are options at your disposal, and there's definitely considerations that you have to make when you make that decision. Okay. Where are your records stored? Well, depending on the company, and there's no company in particular that these graphics are pointed towards. This one made me laugh because when I saw this, my records are behind door number. It made me think of the show Let's Make a Deal. And when I was a kid, it was Monty Hall that was the host of Let's Make a Deal. I think today it's Wayne Brady that does that show. I don't know whether he still does it, but basically for them, there are prizes behind the door, and they ask the contestants to pick which door the highest value prize is behind. In this case, we're just saying, what door are your records behind? And hopefully, if this is what you're doing, you know which door they are. For other organizations, it's like, are you storing your records in the abyss? You have records from everywhere, being stored everywhere. They're in all different formats. They could be anywhere. And that abyss you see right there, that's where your records are. And it's very difficult to find your records when that's a situation that you've got. For other companies, are you selecting your storage location like throwing a dart at a dartboard? Well, one day you're storing it over here. Well, the next day you're storing it over there. And to make sure that these type of scenarios don't happen, what you need to do, you need to have record storage requires a strategy. And we'll talk about that as we get near the end of today's class. You don't want storage to be guesswork. You want storage to be deliberate. You want storage to be the right decision for you, where you're storing it, why you're storing it, and the functionality that you get by storing it there. So again, we always document everything. We have our policies, we have our procedures, and you definitely, within your procedures, need a records storage strategy. We talked about this in the first class. It was the records management lifecycle. Today, I wanted to come back to that, but just talk about steps 2 and steps 3. Step 2 is use and modify, and step 3 is maintain and protect. When you use or modify, and we're talking about storing our records and be able to get them back, we have to work within the mindset that it's not just an individual employee that may use these records, but it could be used among several employees because it's a collaboration effort going on between them all. One of the other things we have to consider when it comes to this life cycle and storing our records is the ability to understand that modifications could happen to these records, and we need to be able to capture and track these modifications. I always think of my days back to purchasing. I was always happy that records management reported to purchasing because that meant I was in charge of vendor management and contract management. When it comes to contracts, we may start out with the initial template, and by the time we come to the final contract, which we all agree on, there could be anywhere from 1 change to 8 to 10 to 12 changes. Those people that know me know that when I do contracts, I sit there with a red pen in my hand because I know that contracts are written in the favor of the owner of who wrote it. So if you're dealing with a vendor and it's the vendor's contract, the contract is written in their favor. I'm not telling you they're trying to rip you off. I'm not saying that at all. just as certain things are going to be written in their favor. The same as if you write your contract and you ask a vendor to sign it, you're going to have various terms within that contract that is in your favor. It's just natural. It's what we do. So I would sit there if it was a vendor contract, and I'd sit there with a red pen and I would go line by line. And invariably, they're going to see me take that red pen and strike through a line and initial next to it. And I'm going to say, nope, not in this contract. And it could be anything. It just didn't appeal to me, and I thought it was against my organization. For me to sign that contract with those terms wasn't in the best interest of my organization. And that can happen a number of times. So when you get to the final contract and you save it electronically, we're going to have in the name of the file, the vendor name, the date it was signed, and the word final. So we know that that is the final contract that we all agreed upon and is signed. But if somebody comes back and says, well, wait a minute, there was this term that's not in here anymore. Where did it go? When was it eliminated? We may need to go back and look at the various versions. So along with where are you storing your records and be able to get them back, do you need version control? So if there's a question of when did this disappear, or when was this added, when was it deleted, when was it modified, you have the ability to look at the versions of well. So, where you're storing it, does it accept every version of a document? And if it does, what is your plan to make that happen? How do you accomplish that? So that's the use and modify portion of the life cycle that today's class talks about. And then we go to maintain and protect. Maintain and protect, it gives a continuation of use and modify. You're maintaining those records where they should be maintained, but you're also protecting them. So only those people that should have access to those records do. You want to make sure that proper security is in place. So as an example, if you're an individual that works in human resources, some employees in human resources are going to see resumes and cover letters and deal with initial paperwork to onboard an employee, where other human resources employees will be further down the road once the employee is hired, and they're going to be able to see salary, other compensation, and those things that the other first employee won't need to see. And the way you do that is you set your permissions up to access your records first from a role-based access capability, which means you do not want to manage access to your records down to the individual employee. That would be a nightmare. So you establish roles. So there'll be a role in HR to do the first part that I talked about. There'll be a role in HR to do the second part I talked about. And then you just assign an employee to a role type. And that way, if once they get assigned, you move them in. If they leave the company, you can remove them, or if they are upgraded and now they are out of the first box, but they're in the second box, it's just easier to move individuals around. The current company I'm in is probably about 100 people strong, good number of people. When I was at Commerce Bank, we were 17,000 people. I do not want to manage individual user profiles to 17,000 people. That would be a nightmare. But I can put them into role-based, reduce the number of roles, and put the people in the correct role. It's much easier to manage. The other portion of access deals with what we call attribute access, and that mainly deals with what type of information is a person able to see and not able to see. It happens a lot in government when you have records that are secret or top secret or any other classified type of record. Only certain people should have that, and that's done through establishing what they can see through an attribute. So you may have the ability to see certain records in a user profile, and then your attribute portion of your profile tells you what level of records you can see, and that covers the type of records you can see, what type of information it has, and the security level that you need. So that's what we talk about with maintain and protect, and that is step 3 within the records management lifecycle. Here is probably one of the most important words that will help you within records management, and that is metadata. The question is, what is metadata? It's basically real easy, is data about the record. It's all those things describing the record and what it is, as well as other things we'll talk about in a minute, that will help you when it comes to locating your records. Again, I don't like to reinvent the wheel. If there's a definition out there I can use, we'll give them credit for it and use their definition. ARMA International in the Glossary of Terms, 4th edition, has the definition of metadata as the structured information that describes, explains, locates, or otherwise makes it easier to retrieve, use, or manage information resources. So that's the technical definition of metadata. They also go on within the glossary to note that metadata is typically broken down into broad types that include, but are not limited to, administrative metadata, content metadata, descriptive metadata, preservation metadata, and structural metadata. For us as end users, the metadata that we're used to is what is the name of the record? What is the description of the record? What is the date of the record or the date range? Where is it being stored? What is its format? Who's the owner? What's the file size? If you're dealing with electronic records, what's the file size? Because you could be dealing with video records, audio records, as well as PowerPoint presentations or any other type of format that could be of a particular size. All of those things are metadata, which then helps you find the record at the time that you need to find it for. If you don't have metadata, then your chances of finding the records that you need will be exponentially more difficult. And some would say next to impossible. And of course, I'm a storyteller and I have a line in there, tell the story, Ray. I actually told the story last class, and I realized as I was telling it, I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to talk about this next week, but again, it's a good story, so let's tell it again. A number of years ago, I was a panel speaker with 3 other people. We spoke about records management for the real estate industry. We were in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and at lunchtime, I was sitting next to one of the other speakers. He was a lawyer for a firm in Philadelphia. We got talking about, who do you work for? What do you do? And he told me about, where he worked. And he also said, I'm an adjunct instructor at Rutgers University in Camden. I teach e-discovery. And I went, really? I said, that's cool. That's really interesting. How do you teach it? And he said, well, the first class is the most important. The first class, we bring in all the students and we have them sit down at their desk. And then I pick 2 of them. I bring one student up to the front of the class and I have them sit at a desk that's now facing the other students. And there's a box filled with paper. I get another student, I have them come up to the front of the class. I sit them down at a desk also facing the other students, and they have a laptop. And I hand them each a piece of paper and it says, congratulations, you're the records manager for the company. We now under litigation and have to find the following records to respond to that litigation. Your clock starts now. And however many records, 8, 10, whatever it would be, he would then tell them, go find the records. And he would look at the class and say, who do you think is going to find the records sooner? And invariably, the students would say the person with the laptop, and they were right, because the person with the laptop has the ability to do searching on the user, the name of the document, date ranges, all those different things we talked about, and maybe even keyword searches, where the person with the box filled with paper had to go page by page to find the records that corresponded to the list. And he was very upfront with them. The box and the laptop contain all the records I just gave you on the list. But what if you're the person with the box of paper records and the last page at the bottom of that box is a record? That means you have to physically go through and read every record until you find them all. And the last piece of paper will be the last record you'll need to get all on that list. I want you to think now about that person with the box and the paper records, like you not having metadata. You can't search. There's no keyword searches. There's no date ranges. There's no owners. There's no nothing. You have to go page by page. And that's almost like using paper records to sort when you don't have metadata. You physically have to review everything, and it takes forever. The amount of time is just horrible. I wouldn't even want to imagine how long it would take someone to go through an entire box of paper. versus somebody who has a laptop. So have your metadata. That's one of the first questions you want to ask, and hopefully everybody listening in this class knows the answer to that question right now. Do you have metadata? If you don't know the answer to that question, hope that you do, but get an answer to it. Physical records repositories. There are a number of places where records can be stored. And in the physical world, there are some like you see on the screen. If you're working within your own building, your departments could have drawers that have records in them. There could be filing cabinets that have records in them. They might even maybe be starting to get records together in boxes to send off-site. So there's multiple places that records can be. Also on site, and my setup was a prime example. There were various operations buildings that I had in southern New Jersey where I'm located, probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 operations buildings within a 2-mile distance from one another. And in 3 of them, I had on-site records rooms where the activity of those records was so much that it didn't make sense to bring those records off. We would cycle them out of an on-site records room when the activity for those records decreased, but run an on-site records room for the records that did have an activity. And that way, it cut down on the amount of time to get those records back to the end users. I also had my own off-site record center. We had 10,000 square feet of warehouse space, mezzanine in. I told you that story on day one. Mezzanine in, fire suppression systems. It was all first rate. They had no program, but they had all the equipment was top notch, which eventually we got the program up to the level of the equipment. We'll put it to you that way. And we ran our own record center. And then we also, over time, ended up using a third-party storage facility where we could have been doing open shelf filing, because in banking you have file folders with loans or any other activity, employee files that you would have files for. If you want to do open shelf filing, you can do that, or you can do filing in boxes, whatever best suits your program. There are always challenges when it comes to physical records repositories, and the first challenge to me is access of the record while it's there, access of the record while it's being picked up and delivered there, or delivered back to the end user. I'm huge on chain of command, and it's very easy for a vendor to walk into one of my operations buildings and get to the department where those records should go, and maybe the person they're meant for is out to lunch, or they're sick that day, so somebody else takes the records. Well, that just broke the chain of command. It needed to go to a specific person. I'm not saying the other person wasn't authorized. They could be authorized as a departmental employee, but because there was that extra step between who ordered it and them actually getting it, we have to make sure that there's this level of security of those records until they get into that person's hands. Another challenge of physical records repository is the ability to assign retention. I mean, let's face it, it's physical paper records. How are you assigning retention? You can't. And that means that, that there could definitely be no way without, bringing technology into consideration by using software to your records, which a third-party vendor can do. And even on site, we could have our own record software, which is tracking you then can assign retention. Accuracy of record types. We always wanted to have one record type per box. That's not always possible. In some cases, in some of our locations, in 1 month, they might have a record might be a few file folders, and maybe it could take 5 or 6 record types of the same retention life that could fill one box. And that was always one of the things we told people about. If you're putting different record types in the same box, there's 2 things. You want to know what record types they are, and you want to make sure they're the same retention life. Because if you put a record in that's a 5-year retention life and everything else in that box is a 3-year retention life, you need to tie the retention to the longest life, which would be the 5-year record. The other thing that comes into play and is a challenge when it comes to physical records repositories is the accuracy of the file box contents. Invariably, if we're using a transmittal to get our boxes to a third-party vendor, they usually have a major and minor description line. The end user would have to pick one record type that obviously was the correct retention life for the longest life of the record in the box. But on the major and minor description, they would list each of the record types in the box. If they don't do that, then you have no idea what's in the box. As an example, new account information could be listed, and that could be in the description. But if all they list is new account information, put the correct record code in, and list nothing else, but there's 4 or 5 other record types in that box, there's no way to know unless you do a physical review of the box. So we always try to train people that if they're filling out a transmittal for off-site record storage and they're putting multiple record types in a box, make sure there's similar retention, and somewhere in that transmittal, you need to have the name of each of the record types in it. And the last bullet point, third-party storage vendors will not verify the accuracy of the records you're sending. That's your job, and that's accurate. There is one caveat, and that is if you're willing to pay a third-party storage vendor to index your box, which there's an extra cost for, they'll do that. And that means they have to pop the lid and go through the box. That was mainly done for our lending area, whether it was mortgages or some other type of loan that was taken out. And on the file folders that were in each box for each loan, there would be a name and there would be a loan number. And that was the information, all the information they need to capture, the loan name and the loan number. And they would index it down to that level. But that you're going to pay for. You do have ways to cut down some of your costs, especially with indexing. Perhaps the vendor will allow you, if their system is online and you want to devote one of your people to doing it, you can go on and create the index yourself. So the index is already in the system because you put it there, which means that it shouldn't be costing you any more money with them to do it because you did it. But those are the challenges of physical records repositories, that it's very difficult at times to assign retention to the record. Sometimes you don't know which records are there, and you sure can't do any retention with it. And then obviously back and forth, getting it or sending it, there could be chain of command issues. Electronic records storage. The first line should not surprise you. And yes, I put it in red. Email. Ray screams, no! I thought about it today. And if any of you have watched Star Wars, at the point in the movie where Luke Skywalker is told that Darth Vader is his father, and Luke screams, no! That's me. That's my no. It's the same level no. But that at least gives you a visual of how I feel about records being stored in email. I added another one for this class, USB drives, almost as bad as email. And they're almost as bad and maybe if not worse, because USB drives are not attached to your computer system. They're usually sitting in desk drawers. I'm looking at my desk here. I've got 4 USB drives on my desk right now. I would have to search. I would have to load each USB into the drive, and then look at the contents of each to know what was where. So, do you have people using USB drives in your organization? Do they totally remove the record from that USB drive and store it somewhere else? Or are they sitting in a drawer or on a desk or somewhere? Because it's literally almost impossible to police and make sure that it's done properly. There's shared drives and network drives. It has line of business systems. We always pick on human resources. Human resources has their own line of business system. There's a lot of others out there. There are homegrown systems. Homegrown systems where someone at the organization is smart enough to build an actual electronic system that could perform a certain task and manage certain records. There could be issues with that down the road, and obviously there's records management software. That's what it's built for. That's what it's made for. And you just have to understand, does it have the functionality that you want? With electronic storage, there's also third-party vendor storage options. I do encourage you to know if you're using a third-party vendor for storage, where's the location of those records? Because usually the location of the records follows the law within the area that they're sitting. So if I'm in Pennsylvania or the United States, there's going to be US law that governs what I can access, how I can access it, when I can access it. If for cost measures, the vendor is storing your records and they're accessible through the cloud, but they're in another country, then it's the rules and laws of the country that your records are sitting in, what level access you've got. So always make sure you know if you're going with a third-party vendor, don't be afraid to ask them, where are my records being stored? What is the exact physical location of the storage? You should know that. And then finally, with third-party vendor storage, there's something we talk about called single tenant versus multi-tenant. For those of you that haven't heard about these two things, single tenant refers to a type of system that is storing your records, that your records are the only records there. There will be no other organization's records in that system. That system is solely dedicated to you, and you will pay for that, but it's just your records. A multi-tenant system is where you have a system where multiple organizations' records are stored within the same system. And again, I'm a records guy, not an IT guy. So I will say there are partitions within the system, so you can only access your records and any other organization can only access theirs. My word is a partition. An IT person might use a different phrase. To give you a visual, I want you to come to my neighborhood. When you walk up to my house and you knock on the front door, that's a single tenant system. And I have security at my house, and I will access that security to make sure that only those people get in that I allow to get in. But there's an apartment building across the street, and you may be someone that has a key to get in the front door, or even worse, maybe you picked the lock, and now you're inside the building, and now you have access to every door to every apartment. And if you're able to get past the front door, what's the chances you can get past every door in the building? So again, think of Facebook or LinkedIn. We all go to the same address, linkedin.com or facebook.com. What governs what we can see is our logon and our password. But everybody's information is in the same system. And it's just a matter of, and don't ask me, I can't do it, but if somebody wants to get to your information and it's in a multi-tenant system, if they can get to one area's information, it's most likely they can get to more than one. So understand the difference between the two. Electronic record storage has its challenges as well. Although they're nice challenges to have, in this case, controlling access. It's easier to control access for electronic records than it is physical paper records, but it still is a challenge. You know, who's currently employed with the company that you're giving access to? Are they still there? Did they leave? When a new hire happens, how do you find out about it? Making sure that your electronic record storage has an audit trail. Who logged in? What records did they access? How long were they there? What was the date? What was the time? There needs to be an audit trail in the background to document who was there and when they were there. Again, can you upload your retention schedule? When you get into things like homegrown systems, line of business systems, things like that, you probably do not have the ability to upload a retention schedule. Maybe you do. If you can't upload your retention schedule, then you can't do records categorization. Is as a record comes into the system, you're identifying what record type it is, and then it's following your retention schedule and the destruction life. So it'll follow the entire life cycle if you have the ability to upload your retention schedule and then do records categorization. And again, line of business systems, things like that, you do not have the ability to do that for the most part, which means everything from a life cycle standpoint becomes a manual process. Now, the last question, can you centralize your records? Having the ability to store all your records in one place is great. There are products out there that will allow you to centralize your records while your end users continue to work within the systems they're used to. I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm a records guy. But I've heard enough to say there are those things called APIs, application interfaces, or connectors that will allow IT people to connect the systems where your records are in your organization to records management software. And then as the records are stored in your other systems, they're electronically being brought into the records management system. That's probably the easiest way I can describe it. But if you can centralize your records, it makes obviously finding your records that much easier. We talked about this in last class, but it's one of the best things out there, in my opinion. And excuse me, I had to take a sip of soda. And that's the records index. You're looking at a combination of the records inventory and the retention schedule, and you're just amping it up. You're adding different fields of what's important to you. It's basically a detailed list of records saved by the entire organization. You could keep it in spreadsheet format. You could keep it in a database format, whatever's comfortable to you. It's searchable and filterable. Here's just like a few of the fields. What are the storage locations? Who are the records owners? What format is it in? And if it's an electronic record, you can provide a link to the actual record type where it's being stored. Also, you can perform data analytics. What you see on the screen now is not an all-inclusive list, but these are some of the fields that you can have within a records index. And you'll note some of them from the records inventory, some of them are from the retention schedule, and some of them are new to this actual records index. So there's a record type and a name and a description, the owner, the department. You know, when I worked at the bank, human resources, we had human resources in 8 to 10 different states. So I would have to note within each state, there was a human resources area. If there was more than one human resources area within a particular state, then we went down to site level. What is the format, the location, the code, the series, etc. And most importantly, again, the link to the record, if you could get it. There's just a lot of things that a records index allows you to do, which we'll talk about here with the benefits of a records index. And again, more because I know somebody would say, what's most important? That again depends on your organization. So this list, the benefits are not in the list of best to worst, they're alphabetical. So I think that a records index is a great benefit to your organization because it provides accessibility to your records. It takes the guesswork out of where your records are because you've taken your time along the back end to do the research to know where those records are, and you're documenting this path all along the way. You're able to perform analytics. Let me give you an example. I told you I had 8 to 10 different human resources departments up and down the East Coast. And maybe I've got, one state because we started in New Jersey. Maybe we have human resources in there in 5 different locations. The big difference with an index over the other documents is a retention schedule will have one record type, one line representing it. A records index will take that record type and we'll have a line for every difference within the record itself. So if that record is being created and saved in 8 different states, there's going to be 8 different lines saved for an employee file. If they're saving it in paper format as well as electronic format, there's going to be a line every time they're doing that. But the analytics portion of it is after you build this index, you can look and see, how do we want to consolidate this list? How do we want to improve the storage of our records? And maybe, you consolidate the number of electronic repositories. Maybe you reduce the number of shared drives or network drives, or maybe they're all saving it within the same line of business system versus it being all over the place. So the analytics that you can do and perform with your records is amazing and allows you to sharpen the tool of storage where your records are and make it the best that it can be. If you're completing your whole index, you're in full compliance with all the regulations and the laws that govern your records. As you do your analytics and you shorten this list, you're operating much more efficiently. You're doing it for the entire organization. You know all of your records and you know where all of your records are. Therefore, there's preservation. And bottom line, if you have an audit, or even if you don't have an audit, you want to show it to your senior people, there's transparency. Here's a document. You know every record in the company, and you know where every record is being saved, period. And there's just a comfort in knowing all that, but also knowing over time you're going to have to keep refining this index. Things will change. A record owner may change. You may add a new record type. A retention life may change. So there's certain information that you're going to have to update every now and then. But again, there's just a level of transparency that you have a comfort knowing that you're operating at peak efficiency in the highest level that you can. All right, I don't normally use the same graphic twice in a presentation, but I said it before, I'll say it again. I see this picture and I just smile because although I never had brown hair and right now it's, well, that some people call it gray. I say I kind of have wisdom highlights. I never had the hair like that guy, but I felt like that guy before. I had to put the graphic back in. Why do you need to get your record back? Well, number one, there's litigation in banking and insurance and investments. There was always litigation we were dealing with, and our industries are not the only ones. There's litigation all over the place. You have to be prepared for that. There are active records that your end users are going to need to get back, whether it's one person working with a record or a group of people collaborating on a record. They're still working with them. So they have to make sure that they know where they're at so they have access. There could be projects that come from this, that you have to access a certain number of records to then, work the project and come up with findings for whatever that project may be. And then, things like FOIA requests. Now, for those of us in the commercial world, we don't have FOIA requests, but those in the government have FOIA requests where somebody's going to come in and say, I need the records to deal with this topic and this information during this time period. And then the government agencies are responsible to get them that information back. And if some of the information is classified or that they can redact some of the information out of it due to that being classified, but they still have to provide that information back. So these are just some of the reasons why you need to get your records back. Now, in the old days, when I first started, it was called discovery. Our records were being created electronically, but by law, we were keeping them in a physical format. We don't worry about discovery. We call it e-discovery. And again, going back to the ARMA Glossary of Terms, 4th edition, it's any process by which electronic data is sought, located, secured, and searched with the intent of using it as evidence in a civil or criminal legal case. They also, in this definition, also provide an afternote that said court-ordered or government sanctioning hacking for the purpose of obtaining critical evidence is also a type of e-discovery. So thank you, ARMA International. I think that provides a very clear idea of what e-discovery is all about. E-discovery has a purpose and a process. It also has some challenges. It all starts with the preservation of your records. And then depending on what the e-discovery is all about, you're going out there and you're going to collect the records that are pertinent to that reason. Once you build that collection, you'll review and analyze them. You'll look at what records that you brought in, which ones are responsive to what you're doing. And then once you only have those records, then you'll publish the findings, whether you're just reporting everything that you've got and you're giving them copies, or in the case of the government, there may be some redaction of information that you can't provide, but you'll give them all the rest. There are always challenges when it comes to e-discovery. I mean, I haven't seen a case study lately, but for years, every year a case study came out, more and more volume. It was just getting higher, more records created every year with the expectation that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the volume of records was just going to be off the chart. Also, the variety of formats that we have to maintain, and having the software to be able to do that, or the repositories, able to hold that. And then finally, cost and time. There is always a cost of doing something. If you have to devote a person to do e-discovery, part of their salary is going towards performing that e-discovery process. And that kind of corresponds with the time. how much time does it take? How much time do you or your staff or, however you're doing your discovery, are you tracking the amount of time that discovery is taking? Next week, or not next week, 2 weeks from now, when we talk about the resources you'll need, we'll talk about budgeting. And, you may want to put a line item in the budget for the cost of a person and how much time you're going to be spending to do e-discovery. Okay, we're going to finish up today, and I want to talk to you about record storage strategy. And no, this slide is not by accident. I want you to rank what's a priority for you. Again, what's the size of your organization? What industry are you in? And that type of thing. So number one on my list is finding your records. That's primo. You have to be able to find your records. So that is a major priority. But after that, what's a priority on your list? Access from a security and collaboration standpoint, whether you're assigning retention for the records management lifecycle, can you do that? Because if you can't assign retention, you can't upload schedule. Is that really the storage medium that you want to use? Integration. If you have to do e-discovery and none of your systems are integrated, let's say you have 10 systems, you may have to perform the same discovery 10 times. And then hopefully within those 10 repositories, you find what you're looking for, because if you don't, that means where do you go after that? And then understanding your strategies about preservation of the records that you must maintain, and ultimately the transparency that comes from knowing where your records are, where they're stored, and confidently being able to say, I can get them back. I'll end on this slide, record storage strategy. I want to talk about your organizational culture. When I was at Commerce Bank, we were the Yes Bank. That was one of our taglines. That was one of our slogans. We were the Yes Bank. We were America's most convenient bank. We had internal programs called Wow the Customer. And those were programs which said, we are going to give world-class customer service every time. That was the goal. And we knew that there were times that we couldn't do what the end user wanted, but we would try anyway. I just have to say, you have to make sure that your storage strategy and your record strategy, it follows every other corporate strategy that's been developed and is being implemented. Any strategy in your organization, how often is it updated and who approves it? And I guess the statement at the bottom of the slide says it all for me. One of our vendors, one of the account managers, one of the vendors I used to use, we were sitting in my office one day and they wanted to do something, and he looked at me and he just said, Ray, culture can eat strategy for lunch. And it's true. Now, the good news for me, my organization was about providing world-class customer service, going above and beyond the call of duty whenever you can, better the cost, improve the efficiency. And that's everything we were trying to recommend with my program. So my strategy mirror imaged the strategy of the organization. So it all worked out perfectly. All right, I want to say congratulations. You have completed class 3. Let's recap what we've learned. We've talked about understanding where your records are stored, the importance of step 2 and step 3 in the records management lifecycle. If there's a word you walk away with today and you want to know it, you want to have it, you want to live it, you want to breathe it, it's metadata. We've talked about the record repository types. We've talked about the records index again, one of the best tools you have in your belt. We've talked about the reasons why you need to find your records. Talked a little bit about e-discovery, and we talked about the records storage strategy. Preview of class 4, that's the resources you'll need to both find your records, both financial and human, or not to find your records, but you'll need for both financial and human resources to run your records program. So we'll talk about, building a records management department and managing a records management budget. And one of the keys to success, which I 1000% believe in, and that is senior management buy-in, and then marketing your successes. Our Extreme Championship performance tip today, I want you to partner with IT. In the old days, everybody thought that IT and records management were at odds with one another, and they're not. Once IT realized that records management wasn't going to tell them what systems to buy, and records management realized IT didn't care about managing records, they just wanted to make sure the right systems were in place, they realized that they could partner together. So, do what I did, whether I'm working on the board of the Army Keystone chapter and running that chapter, or whether I'm working in my own records management program. I want to make sure I partner with the right people, and in a records management program, it is without a doubt my IT counterpart. They're the expert on technology. I'm the expert on records management. And trust me, your partnership can raise your program to the highest level. All right, before we leave today, I know we have one question, and that one question was, have you considered role-based retention schedule for email? The one area of role-based retention in email that I am aware of is the capstone approach for the U.S. government federal agency email. There are 3 levels of capstone email: capstone officials, the non-capstone officials, and then I believe the third is administrative. And each one of them, capstone official, has a permanent retention life. I believe non-capstone is 7 years. I haven't looked at that in a while, so don't quote me on it. And I think administrative is 3. But they implemented that within the government years ago, and it just made it easier to understand how long email should be kept. Now, what that also means is where I would tell you an email coming to me saying, "Hey, Ray, you want to go to lunch?" In the commercial world, that's not an email. That's just somebody sending me an email saying, "Do you want to go to lunch?" But if you're a capstone official and somebody sends you an email, "Excuse me, capstone official, do you want to go to lunch?" It's going to be kept permanently. So I know we have some other questions, but we are at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to head out the door. We'll answer any questions that are in the chat box. We'll do that at the beginning of next class. But I do want to thank you for tuning in today for class 3. Class 4 will be the resources you'll need, both financial and human. It'll be aired on November 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to reach Rich, you want to reach myself, our email addresses are on the screen right now. If you have any comments, any questions, any suggestions, please send them to us. Also, we're changing the link style that you're getting to access the recordings. There were some individuals, mainly in the government, I think their own internal firewalls were causing a problem with them accessing where our recordings were stored. And we relocated them to our YouTube channel. And I think that all of them were able to get through to the recording. So that's where it's going to be. Not sure you'll get it tomorrow, but we'll compile this recording. We'll get it out to you with an email as soon as we can. But I want to thank you very much for attending class 3. Very much looking forward to you attending class 4. So have a great next 2 weeks, and we'll talk to you soon. So take care.